When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: the hypnosis thing. User: starred 6Z2. Posted October 11th, 1995.
Something happened during a sleepover at my friend Bailey's house last summer. No one believes me, not my mom or my dad or even my brother Chris, but it was real. Maybe someone reading this will understand. Until last summer and what I've started calling the hypnosis thing, we would always go to Bailey's for sleepovers. Her dad does something with computers, so they live in a huge house up on Callahan Road. It's got something like 5 bedrooms, a den in the basement, an indoor pool, all kinds of stuff. It's like a mansion compared to where we live. Her mom is also pretty cool and leaves us alone when we stay over. Sometimes we'll stay up to 3 or 4 in the morning and no one bothers us. On the night of the hypnosis thing, we stayed up till around 1:30 in the morning. It was me, Bailey, and our friend Ashley. You know how when you have sleepovers, you hit a certain part of the night where you get a second wind? That had happened, and so we were wide awake watching these gross commercials for telephone dating. They show all these girls dancing in nightclubs, and then some guy in a suit comes on to say how rejection stinks and the girls on the phone won't ever reject you. All I can say is, if that's what nightclubs look like, I don't understand what all the excitement is about. They look crowded, loud, and mostly full of women in crop tops. None of that appeals to me. When we got bored with infomercials, we started reading Bailey's mom's papers, like The Star and National Enquirer. One of them, I think it was The Star, had a whole page about hippie stuff, like how tired people can draw power from the earth to give them more energy, or how hypnosis could take away your stress. I wasn't tired or stressed, but drawing power from the earth sounded pretty cool, kind of like superpowers, so I said we should try the exercise. Bailey's up for pretty much everything. She can't wait till she can go to nightclubs, so she agreed right away. Ashley wasn't as into it, but she went along because we were so into the idea. I lay flat on the ground and Bailey started rubbing my temples and saying things like, "You are getting very sleepy," and so of course I laughed, and Bailey laughed too, then lightly hit my arm and told me to take it seriously, so I tried to stop goofing around and relax into it while she read the steps from the magazine. I remember her telling me to picture a door in my body, then to imagine that door opening. I did as she said, imagining a heavy metal door like a bank vault slowly swinging open. She then said I should imagine pulling electricity up from the ground through that door, and I did that too. Seeing these purple bolts, I blacked out. From awake to asleep like someone had thrown a light switch. When I woke up, I wasn't on the floor anymore. Instead, I was on the sofa and my friends were gone. I didn't know what time it was or how long I'd been asleep, but I was annoyed they'd left me, so I got up to go look for them. They were upstairs talking to Bailey's dad, who was trying to calm them down. When I approached them, they almost looked afraid of me, but wouldn't say why. It was Ashley who finally told me what had happened. She said, after the part where Bailey and I were laughing, I started shaking so badly they thought I was having a seizure. At first, they assumed it was a joke, but I kept shaking until I suddenly stopped. Then, I apparently began giggling in a terrible, low voice. According to Ashley, I spoke in a voice that was too deep to be my own, and I told them they were pretty little witches now, but they would all burn in hell with Bailey's grandfather, who had died a year before. According to Ashley, Bailey thought I was faking and got angry, but when she tried to touch me, the voice, deep and slow like a man's, said that if she wanted to live, she would keep her hands to herself. Then, she said I started shaking again, and when Ashley reached out to touch me, I grabbed her arm and said in a horrible tone of voice, "Your mother is sick." That finished them, and is when they ran upstairs. I have no memory of any of this, but believe them because it changed our friendship. We're still in touch, but less close than they were, some of which I blame on the fact that Ashley's mom was diagnosed with a serious illness not long after this. I don't think I had anything to do with that, but still, Ashley has treated me differently ever since.
Subject, the mailbox. User, enters Hi-Shy. Posted June 8, 1994.
When I moved away from home after high school, my parents decided to sell the house I'd grown up in and move into something a little smaller. They ended up buying a little brick bungalow in Hahnville, a small town in St. Charles Parish, northwest of New Orleans. It's a nice little house, built right next to Lincoln Road with a mailbox out front and a huge yard out back. They seem happy there, which is great, and I seem to have made a friend, or at least, I think I have. Let me explain. Whatever my folks couldn't sell or give away from the old house was packed into a big yellow Ryder truck that my dad nominated me to drive. By the time they got themselves organized and made it to Hahnville, it was sweltering, and unloading the truck became an endurance test. By mid-afternoon, I was thirsty enough it qualified as a medical emergency, so I assumed what I saw was some kind of hallucination. It was just a quick glimpse, movement in the grove of oak trees that separates my parents' properties from their neighbors at such a height that it couldn't possibly have been real. I shook it off and went inside for a glass or three of Mom's sweet tea. The next time I saw the thing that lives in my parents' neighborhood, it was impossible to ignore. It was sunset and I was out on their porch having a smoke. The sky above was practically on fire with shades of red and orange, and I was so transfixed it took me a while to notice the prickly feeling of being watched. I looked down from the view to see, standing next to the mailbox not 15 feet away from me, what looked like a shadow in the shape of a man. Not just any man, though. This person, or thing, or whatever it was, had to be at least 8 feet high and powerfully built like a bodybuilder or a gorilla. It didn't move in any one direction, but I could see it swaying slightly as if it had weight it was periodically redistributing. To add to the air of unreality, it was translucent enough to allow the neighbor's porch light to dimly shine through. As the light diminished, so did it, until finally it turned around and began to walk away, It had gone fewer than 10 steps before disappearing completely. Once it was gone, I sat there for almost half an hour trying to comprehend the experience. Where I grew up, there were lots of ghost stories and old legends about haunted places, but ain't nobody talked about giant shadow gorillas. That was a new one on me. I decided not to say anything to Mom and Dad. After all, who'd believe something like that? My next couple visits were uneventful, and neither of my parents ever mentioned anything out of the ordinary, so I was tempted to write the experience off as some kind of waking dream when the creature appeared again. This time, it was around 9 p.m., and I was driving back from a snack run at the Chevron on River Road. As I mentioned before, there are stands of oak trees separating my parents' property from their neighbors, and that's where the shadow man was this time, but unlike last time, he wasn't looking at me. Instead, I saw the big head swiveling back and forth as it walked between the branches. If it wasn't in such a tiny crop of trees, I'd say it looked like he was lost in the woods. I slowed down to look at him, and that's when he finally saw me. The shadow turned toward the sound of my car passing, and a single, thick arm raised toward me, almost as if in greeting. What could I do? I did the same in return, feeling a chill pass through me. Just saying hi to a ghost gorilla, man, what could be more normal? Unbelievable. As weird as that whole thing was, it in no way prepared me for the next encounter, which is the most recent one to date. Again, it was later in the day, maybe 6 or 7, and I'd just come back from making groceries down at the Winn-Dixie. My folks were out, so it was just me bringing in their groceries, and I had to do it in a couple trips. On my way back from the first trip, I stopped short just as I hit the front door. The shadow was back in the same spot I'd seen it during sunset, right next to the mailbox. As I watched, the shadow actually leaned on the mailbox, its chin resting in its palm. An involuntary hey came out of me, like I had just bumped into an old acquaintance I hadn't seen in a while, and the shadow actually nodded at me. Yeah, you read that right. It nodded at me, as if we were two old buddies who'd run into each other at the barber shop. We stood there looking at each other for a few minutes. Well, I couldn't see its eyes, but I assumed it was looking at me as its face was pointed in my way. Then, almost as if it realized it had to break the ice, it gestured toward the car and its open trunk, almost as if to say, "Those pizzas are gonna thaw, you leave them in there much longer." So I very slowly started to edge toward the car, turning my back briefly, only to immediately spin back around. The shadow hadn't moved and was still bent over the mailbox. It gave a little wave as if to show it was aware of where I was, but had no interest in doing anything about it. I collected my groceries, sweating despite the cool evening air, and when I walked back to the front door, I looked at the shadow and actually said, "Do you want to come inside?" I don't know what possessed me to say it, any more than I know what I would have done if it had agreed, but it didn't. Instead, the shadow man simply shook his head and pointed to the mailbox before making a chopping motion with his hand. I thought about that for a second. "You can't go past the mailbox?" I asked. It nodded. "Why?" The shadow didn't move. Sure, of course. That was probably asking for a bit too much normalcy in what was already a normal situation. "Well," I said, "I'll be right back." When the groceries were put away, I grabbed my smokes and went back out. The sun was setting, and again, I could see the porch light from across the street shining through the shadow man. I flopped into the wicker chair my folks keep out there and lit up a cigarette. "Well," I said, "my name is Randy. It's nice to meet you." And then, together, the shadow man and I watched the sun go down on another day. But when I thought to look again, he was gone.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.